Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Deep Thoughts. Today we're going to talk about something that I think about quite often when I try to answer the question of where the hell are we? I'm going to call this episode Policies of the Universe. And what that means is, when you go somewhere and there are rules and policies about how to behave and what's allowed and what's not allowed. Maybe you're at a swimming pool and you're not allowed to run, or you're at some location and you got to check in and get your pass and all this stuff. You can't go eat it after 2 o'clock and da-da-da. It's almost like the military, like protocol. A lot of us will get to the point where we go, wow, look what man has done against man. For the betterment of man, we have all these rules and policies. Like military agencies are just riddled with policies. Educational institutions, any of the bureaucracy like the Department of Motor Vehicles. So what about the universe? What about this place we are right now? Are there policies in the way that we exist, and can we see them? Do we already deal with them? And of course the answer is yes. Now, we have to acknowledge right from the very beginning, for those that have been conditioned to believe that the world is just an evolutionary bunch of accidents, a something from nothing formula, and therefore proudly hoisting up their atheist flag, which consequently requires a lot less thinking. To them, this episode is going to be essentially a cartoon of hysterics in acknowledging any other quality to the universe other than, I guess, their limited mass and energy model. For those of us who've had some special experiences in the universe, or we acknowledge some unknown things that have taken place, we have the thread in the sweater that proves to us the universe is actually a lot more intense than we can potentially define. We're not claiming to have any grand definition. We have our belief systems. Like I believe in reincarnation for multiple reasons. I've gone down several rabbit holes on my own. Some people believe they see ghosts a lot, da-da-da. The policies really apply to this reality as it is a spiritual reality. Obviously, in the atheist side of the fence, they have policies that are dictated by scientific possibility, right? So any of their limitations are simply mathematical. And regardless of our belief system, we inherit that model into our model almost verbatim. But the policies I'm talking about that we're going to get into, and we're going to talk about them because I've hinted at them and I've talked about these policies from time to time throughout the episodes, but never put them all in one container with one reflection on them. Our policies are, why don't we ever hear from God? Before the printing press, holy shit, there wasn't a person alive that hadn't had a personal conversation with God. If there is any form of afterlife, which a lot of us believe that there is, why is it that they're not able to talk to us and visit us? I mean, all of us in a normal kind of Day of the Dead celebration from time to time, at least on their birthdays or something, or not our birthdays. Nope, they don't show up. And what is the policy behind us being in this reality? The way that we know it. And I'll just say it that way because each one of us sees reality differently. Why are we typically in this particular reality, we see it as clearly as we do, but we're not capable of traversing to other realities, right? Dreams are when we go to sleep, and they have all these limitations. Why is it that we're allowed to imagine things, but not fully simulate that imagination? Like you're allowed to sit sit at home. And I am implying that there are restrictions that have been put in place, which may not be the case. It may simply be this is the spectrum of capability. You're not capable of doing it. It's not that you're not being allowed to do it. It's just you can't. So anyway, you get my drift. We're going to go down this path here. Let's start with the big one. Before the printing press, God showed up constantly, right? Talking to all kinds of people. Like the story of Job. Just fucking with a guy just to do a little Mortimer debt, like trading places. He has a little bet with the devil as to whether or not he could break Job's back. One of the most incredibly asinine stories about God being a total dick. I mean, like a royal fucking dick, right? But everyone saw God. I mean, it was just like you just had to will it, and boom, he's there. But now we don't see him so much, right? The last guy that I know that really talked about seeing God and talking to God and being a part of some celestial thing was Joseph Smith, the con artist who created the Latter-day Saints Mormon religion. Now, before I say anything else, they're good people. They don't have your same beliefs about gays and all that stuff, but sit down with them. They're not bad people. Even if they completely and utterly disagree with you, my God, they'll still make you feel like they're your best friend while they're doing it. Unlike some Jehovah's Witnesses I know that will, without knowing what the fuck you think, they'll start to tell you how much you're going to hell and how much, you're an extension of Satan. And that's just in the first 30 seconds of them talking. But we don't see God much, right? Definitely don't have any recorded evidence that he's ever come down and talked to anybody. And with all the cell phones going around, you think someone who's feeling God would get a chance to cross over and talk to God, right? Because there's a lot of us that feel God, and we feel, for the sake of another gender, I'm just going to say his, we can feel him and his presence and his guidance sometimes. We can feel strength when you have none. It just happens. It's the weirdest thing. And, from an atheist standpoint, we're all mind-fucking ourselves to dump out certain chemicals through certain belief systems. And for the rest of us, we don't feel completely out of control of our mind. We're not hysterical, and still and yet this power comes sometimes. And it could be more than just God himself. It could be every spirit that is paying attention to you from the other side. I tend to believe that your relatives will hang on for a certain number of generations, and then eventually they go, okay, I don't even know these kids. They're related to me, but whatever. This is the next ones that have come up. It's like, okay, I'm handing it down to you. I'm going to go and get reincarnated as a hot blonde. But now let's say the smoke is settled, right? The dust is settled, I should say. The smoke is blown away. And the level of enlightenment we like to believe is right now, right? It's we are the smartest we've ever been right now, which is complete and utter horseshit. But we've got some things figured out that we didn't have figured out in the past, and then we've lost the tone of common decency in many of the areas of life, right? But God doesn't show up. Why is that? And I guess the question should be submitted, did God ever show up in the past? I will tell you, I am utterly not convinced. Every recollection of God merely makes God look like a raving child in most cases. Not all, but most. But I do believe that there is a God. And I just think that some of it is, again, I'm kind of split between the two definitions of central consciousness, one entity of its own creation, and the other one is a neural net of all souls that are in existence right now, and we are merely hive mining a central consciousness. Either way, you can pray however you want, and it'll be to the same alternating force on us, right? I've put a lot of thought into why God doesn't come down and talk to us. When I got my first job at 18, my boss turned to me within the first month and he said, I don't know why people believe in God. He goes, for me, God's going to have to come down and show himself if I'm to believe in him. And my boss was one of the sweetest, wisest men I've ever met in my life. I got ultra lucky being able to work for this guy. And I remember looking at him, and I just felt this overwhelming cascade of what you're saying is completely wrong. That isn't what you need to prove to yourself that God exists. But I didn't say anything with words. I just had this utter, it's like when you hear a lie, sometimes it feels completely horrible. And once you get attuned to lies, you can feel them. It's weird. You won't necessarily have the answer, but every time you introduce a problem into your system, and your system, chases that problem minute to minute, hour to hour, you just simply will hang on until it's proven one way or the other, right? So anyway, I thought about it for a good 10 years and probably 15 years, and started writing a script that kind of solves this issue. But the thing is if God, God showing up in your life might fuck up your life more than you could possibly imagine if you aren't in some heavenly location where you get to control the bad people. You get to avoid the bad people, let's put it that way. Let's say that you're living your life and you have a bunch of your own policies about how you live your life, and then God shows up and proves that he exists. Well, you got two problems at that point. You have two methodologies of how big your problem is going to be post-visit. If you have a chance to sit down with God and ask God every single question about right and wrong, then maybe you have a protocol that you could live after God leaves. But then you're sort of in a jail cell of those policies, right? Let's say you really like to eat late, or you like to eat chocolate, or you like to have sex in a certain way, or whatever, and you've asked all those questions, and God says, well, yeah, I'd really prefer you didn't do that. I mean, you can do whatever you want, but there's hell. This fucking place called hell, which I don't believe in. But then he leaves, and you are now stuck in a prison. Your choice that you had before talking to God is now gone. There's one way, and it's the right way. That is if God's very man-made, right? And then if you visit God, or God shows up, I think you have to be very careful what you would think would be God. This is the other good policy idea. But something shows up in your living room and talks in a deep voice, You divert your eyes, and he tells you to stop doing that. You would then know that God exists, and then you might be in a jail cell of questioning everything you're doing, because now you know that God exists. And the Bible is either his word or it isn't his word. It's either correct or it's not correct. And so then where do you go to find out God's policies? Because you know God exists. And again, if you weren't able to ask the single question, is there a hell for doing everything wrong, then that would be its own living hell, right? God, I forgot to ask him, but hell exists. I thought it was kind of a negative question to ask him. Boom, boom, boom. So now remove all that stress of meeting God in one of two ways. Think about how relaxed you are that you haven't met God, that you have a choice. Remember, my philosophy is that to be a God, to know everything, is hell. There's no curiosity in the world. There's no more exploration in the world. You don't have to spend a second thinking up a solution to anything, because you know the solution to it already. There are no voids in existence. To be human is probably one of the greatest gifts that we could have ever received. Having voids of knowledge, having the ability to believe in magic, right? And the policies that are in place that make up this interesting form factor, which is humanity, which is an energy-based, sort of ethereal-based energy. It's a privilege. Now, the God one is very interesting and very powerful, because it is the penultimate thing that you can get as a result of the policies. But this policy of meeting God is the greatest one I can give you to start off the conversation, because it will start to, if you get that, the points that I've made, it's going to help you understand all the other policies. Now, once you become, I'll just digress into the subject matter a little bit. Once you become aware that there are policies, things that simply aren't allowed, you will start to feel the constraints of your container. Forget about firmament dome. The more that you understand the fact that you can think and that thinking is energy, once you realize that observing things actually changes their behaviors, if you read any of those studies about, people feeling, all of us can actually sense being looked at by another human being, that gets interesting. But in the end, you will find that there are limitations, right? That perhaps shouldn't necessarily or do not have to be there, right? But then you start to think, okay, how would the public start using these capabilities? And so we'll reflect on that towards the end. It would seem that one of the policies is very interesting, that our evidence of any life after this life be quarantined pretty tightly. Now, it would seem that, there are things that prove to us that there are things on the other side. Not to belabor the issue, but, my grandmother passed away, her saying that she was on the other side 2 hours before I get the phone call that she's on the other side was really odd. For those of you who watched my first season, you'll undoubtedly have run into the story where I specifically had Walt Disney walk up to me at Disneyland and say, "Bob Gurr's over there, go say hi to him," having met Bob Gurr a week earlier. And I walked directly to this guy at the park. And I walked to a location in the park that I haven't been in years without having my daughter be really young, because it's sort of the kiddie area. Walking directly to a ride that, regardless if I have the kid or not with me, I really dislike the ride because it was so old. I walked directly to him with a girlfriend in tow, and he had a good friend, and I've called him since, and I said, "Do you remember this?" And he goes, "Hell yeah, I remember that." And he goes, "What you don't know is that the ride was actually broken for 50 minutes before you came." And he said, "I left and went and got some food and came back." No, he said went and rode Matador, and came back to his submarine ride. So for me, Walt coming up to me, saying Bob Gurr's over there, in sort of a weird mind's eye apparition of him, pretty much looking like he's around probably 30 to 40, somewhere in there, with a little cigarette in his hand, on his right hand, dressed in a suit, waving over his shoulder, and just kind of walked by me, man. And he put a pin in my head of where Bob was. That proved to me, beyond the shadow of a doubt, that Walt's there, that there's something after this life, And it's really sort of a relative phrase saying after this life, You continue living, let's just put it that way. But now let's talk about ghosts. You all know someone who says that they've seen a ghost. I just told you my story, even though mine was not something that someone else could see. It was inside my head. But you'll know someone who said they've seen a ghost. But most of us, like I don't believe I've ever seen an apparition in my life. In terms of it's in the room, and if everyone looked in that direction, we could all see it. I've never seen anything like that in my life. I've talked to some extremely intelligent people who have seen some pretty amazing things, and they weren't exactly happy to be a part of it, but maybe that's part of the game. But I told a story about friends of mine that rented a place in Paris, and they kept seeing an ass print show up in the mattress, and it happened over and over and over. While she was asleep, she'd feel someone sit on the bed. Turns out some old lady died in there. She ended up getting so spooked after about a year of this, she sold it. Then she bumps into the new owner 10 years later at a party, and he's like, "Oh my God, the place was fucking haunted." Because I've never believed that anything could be haunted, but they confirmed the ass print thing, and it just seemed like, something was interacting with this world. It's one thing to see a little bit of light, and it's another thing to have someone physically sit on your bed. In this house here, as weird as it sounds, I've had the bed sitting thing. I haven't seen any imprints on the mattress. But man, the girl that used to live here used to wake up nearly screaming at night because there was just, like an animal walking on the bed. Really weird. Again, it's not even threatening, it's just surprising. So let's go at the policy. Why aren't the spiritual allowed to interact with this world on a common everyday basis? At least that we know of, right? And there's going to be some of you that are going to rightfully say, look, we've just been conditioned not to see them, and perhaps that's the case. We're going to get into bending the spoon before this is over, because it's a very important crescendo to this whole argument. But they don't, do they? I mean, they don't walk around. Let's put it this way. Anyone who's ever experienced a random event, and let me give you a totally random thing. We know that commercial airliners have fallen out of the sky at times for mechanical errors, human errors, whatever, and it hits neighborhoods and kills people. Why mention such a dark idea? Well, I want to impress upon you the people on the ground had no clue that was about to happen. There wasn't anything that they did, thought process-wise, that would have ever summoned a vehicle down to the ground. Now, you might say, hey, I was driving my car and someone swerved and hit me and da-da-da. Well, you could have, you should be imagining that, driving defensively every day of your life. When you're in a public place, you need to scope the joint out. You need to scope out who's fucking crazy. If there's a homeless guy that's trembling and he looks like he's about to go berserk, give the guy a sandwich and calm him down, right? Lest you bear his wrath. But what would the world be like if we had every life that has lived on Earth walking around the Earth? Well, I think right away you should understand that there's been billions of people that have lived here. And so if we had them willy-nilly walking around, they would have to have some sort of policy not to freak us out. You're trying to drive down the street at 60 miles an hour, and an apparition walks in front of you. In your brain, it's a human form. You're going to swerve your car to get away from it. And that's going to cause you to kill everyone who's actually alive, creating more ghosts walking in front of people that are actually alive. So it would seem that there's a basic policy that simply says that once you've passed on and transcended to the next realm of existence, if that truly occurs, you're not to mess with the living. And let's face it, being alive is a little tougher than being dead in some cases, right? We have restrictions. We have limited amount of knowledge. Now, the traditional belief of being dead is that somehow, all the answers to the dinosaurs and everything Eric Dubay is concerned about is then presented to you in this golden book with a big bookmark ready for you to read. There's pearly gates and all this other word segregation up there. But maybe not. Maybe it's not so Smithsonian when you die. Who knows? The idea that the spirits would roam the earth would be that there's something that they need to do while roaming the earth and looking at living beings, even if we can't see them. But even, it would be, I think, presumptuous to rob them of an ecosystem of their own. Think about it. We are in a really light matter-based body. We have our spirit, and our spirit that is our true being, and our mind that is sort of the mezzanine between the two, right? The body and the soul make up the mind. When you die, your mind is obsolete. You don't care about what thought you had in your mortal coil. You go on with your soul and your spirit, whatever, and you live another life. If a soul is living a full life on the other side, then there's no need to really impose a policy, hey, you can't cross over if you happen to find the time bandit back door to where you were. Let's talk about a fun one. Bending the spoon. If you're a normal person, you have bumped into the notion of something that is known in science fiction and sci-fi as telekinetics, or telekinesis. It was in the movie Carrie, and it was most recently reprised, I think, in a most beautiful way in The Matrix 1. The little boy is holding a spoon in the Oracle's house, and he says, "You don't bend the spoon. The spoon never bends. You bend yourself and the universe around the spoon," right? Now, the reason why I'm mentioning the spoon is for several fold. Some of you might believe or have tried to experiment with the notion that there's passages in the Bible and there's passages in ancient tales which it says basically if you have enough faith, you can do anything that you want. You can move an entire mountain with just your mind if you had infinite faith that you could. It's a romantic tale. Now, what's interesting is I believe that in terms of where you exist in the universe, second to second, the law of attraction, I absolutely do believe that you resonate your soul/spirit into the vessel that exists in the particular state of the universe that you most desire. I do believe that. You wiggle yourself either positively into success or negatively into failure. Or if you're living in a state of worry, your car it's like it's wobbling just before it blows apart, if you're not able to push yourself off into the positive realm. So make sure that you have a notion of a positive future for where you want to be. And it doesn't matter how absolutely crazy your life is today. It doesn't matter how injured or ill you are. I need you to start envisioning yourself so far beyond that. You're not envisioning a positive recovery. You're envisioning being recovered. And it's such that, I give an example. Let's say you're lying on your bed and you've been given all these horrible diagnoses from an oncologist that just want to rape your family of money and let you die of cancer. And someone walks in and says, "Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. I'm going to fix you up." And they do something. They twist your ankle. They put their little honey on your forehead. They say a prayer. Whatever they do. And boom, you're cured. I mean, you're not just recovering. You're cured. The nausea that you feel or the lump that you feel, it's gone. And they take your hand and they pull you up and they smile and maybe even give them a hug and you go on and live your life. And 5 to 10 years from that moment, it's almost like you go days without remembering that you were healed by some miracle person. And you feel guilty. Oh my God, I was actually cured by a miracle person. It's that destination thought of that I am totally cured. That's what you have to go for in everything in life. I have the job. I have the relationship. I have it all. It was so lucky that you won the lottery ticket. That's the thought. Those are the thoughts that you're going to have before you need the success to occur. Anyway, digression off. Going back to the spoon. A lot of us have, experimented as a kid and stared at something and tried to get it to move or get it to change. No one likes to admit that, but, most boys have done it. But there seems to be a policy that simply doesn't happen. There haven't been any real convincing individuals that can do it. There's been a tremendous amount of con artists. You have Russian intelligence agencies faking videos of people that can do it, such that the CIA thinks that they've actually got magic human beings. And I'm sure the CIA did their version back. There's the famous guy that went on Johnny Carson and got completely busted once he couldn't create all the props for himself. There have been amazing con artists that use the breath out of their nose to flip over pages in books. I mean, it's phenomenal how incredibly talented these people are and creative and entertaining. But if we had one human being that could do this, we'd have either a superhero or a supervillain. I don't know about you. I haven't seen Superman flying around. I haven't seen someone throwing, commuter buses on a highway with their minds. I haven't seen it. I haven't heard of it. Now you might say, well, that's just because we've all lost faith that it could be done. Maybe the Egyptians built pyramids simply out of brain waves. Maybe. But here's the caveat. Here's the caveat that proves that there's a actual policy of incapability to do such a thing. And that is that there are homeless people all over the world, right? People who are in every conceivable state of insanity that can be had, right? We always talk about how there's infinite numbers, both in a macro sense and a micro sense, right? In a divisional sense and a multiplying sense, from the positive to the negative. Well, every form of insanity that could exist exists. So there are people out there that are in a state of either drug-induced belief systems that they can do things, and there are people that are just malnutritioned. They haven't had any social interaction. They haven't slept well for weeks and weeks and weeks. Some of them believe they can fly, jump off buildings. I mean, when they jump off that building, they utterly and completely believe that they're capable of flying. But they don't fly, do they? We haven't had some homeless guy on a corner throwing, cars around an intersection because no one's stopping to give him money, and he's pissed, and he believes that he can't because his left brain can't stay awake and his right brain's creating a show inside of his mind. And isn't it interesting that we can actually draw some sense of conclusion from such an unfortunate state? For those of you who have done mushrooms or acid or any type of hallucinogenic, ayahuasca, you will have looked at your hand and watched it melt away. And in your mind, you believe your hand's melting away. But you do wake up and your hand is still there and it never melted. Now, there's a very interesting sort of macro view of studying the policies of the universe. There's at least one of you is going to see this video and you are going to, or listen to this podcast, and you're going to say, oh my God, I've been thinking about this for decades. No one's ever said it. And so you're totally with me, and you're going to have incredible comments to add to this video. If you are one of those people, then you've probably spent a fair amount of time sort of searching out the edge of the dome, so to speak, in trying to figure out the policies of the universe. You're out there on the edge, like the little mouse that's constantly searching, every however many days, searching for the edge of the aquarium. You're searching for the door on the edge of the aquarium because it feels confined. Now let me take you into an analogy that might really speak to some of you. When you play, say, a video game with a tremendous amount of hours, like a Fallout 4, and it seems like there's infinite amount of hours you can apply to the center. There's so many storylines. It's nauseating and very fun. But you realize that, let's explore the map. Let's try to find every single hidden building, every single hidden cave, and not engage the main storyline. Let's gauge all the peripheral ideas of what's possible, and you travel out to the edge of the map, and you're like, wow, I wonder what's going to happen when I keep walking this direction, even though the map says it's going to stop. I'm looking out the eyes of my character, and it doesn't seem to be any barrier. But you start walking that way, and eventually it says you can't go any further. You're like, oh, wow, I found the edge. All right. And eventually you explore the edge of everything so much that you have to start engaging the storyline in the center. Almost literally. And you find out, wow, the storyline was actually pretty good. Yeah, it was cool kind of living outside on the edge. And that's where you can end up when you start studying the more existential properties of where we are, is that you're sort of on the edge, looking for the edge. And it gives you further orientation as to where you are and what's possible, such that perhaps in the end, we traverse all the way through the Kubler-Ross process of anger, denial, negotiation, and acceptance. And then what's left is a very focused image of what's possible in the universe. And that, in my opinion, is very helpful to us as human beings, because then we accept the storyline, the narrative in the center of our lives. I made an episode that actually did very well in the first season called The Answer. And it was just an impromptu thing like most of these episodes. But it talked about the answer is really just to live your life and have as much interaction with other life forms as you possibly can. I do think, unfortunately, that several parts of the more commercial Western world, individuals are being robbed of their social interactions with any depth because they are strung out on material objects, material experiences, right? When it living and existing and being entertained costs money every step of the way, right? You can't sit at a kitchen table and pull out a deck of cards and play cards and talk and just have a really good experience. That to that degree that you can't at least do that in addition to everything else, I think that one could say that one is losing. But it's a cyclical thing, right? There seems to be a policy about the intervention of a God in our world. Forget about just meeting God. Let's say you never meet God, but there's a sense that he is controlling things. There are a lot of passages in philosophy and religions that talk about why do the wicked seem to be eternally rewarded in this universe, right? Those who start wars. David Rockefeller just died today at 101. Why do baby eaters get to become the most wealthy people on planet Earth? Why do they seem to be able to live 100 years, having anything and everything that they desire, while when you remain integral to the world, maybe you get some comforts, maybe you don't. It would really speak to, from a policy standpoint, that anything can happen is really where it's at, right? Like I always say, life is fair, and that is that anything can happen. Anything. If you don't really die when you die, your spirit goes on. Well, what's death? What's sin of death? One has to be careful on how you interpret those kind of things. We do have common law, do no harm. I've mentioned a couple times in season 2 here that I've been watching MASH with a buddy of mine, the old episodes from 72 to 83. It's a remarkable show. The amount of talent to put that show together was really phenomenal, and there's been nothing like it since. The final episode being watched by nearly 127 million people. Unbelievable. But it's all about the Korean War, and it's a comedy, but it has a lot of dark episodes in it. And the one theme that constantly gets reiterated, especially by Alan Alda's character, Hawkeye Pierce, is that war is, obviously this ridiculous thing that human beings do. And for most of us that are awake to how the banks profit from either side of this, and, the Korean War was really just another bunch of bullshit to make America borrow money from the banks because they were trying to get us in debt as soon as possible and as deep as possible, right? Without debt, you don't have any capability of robbing someone, right? Once you have them in debt to you, then you can exploit them, and that's what it was all about. Forget any bullshit communist policy crap. But I was thinking about it while I was watching it, because we'll watch like 6 or 7 episodes in a row. And one, there's a policy again of non-intervention. And then I was thinking, this is a slight digression, but it feeds into potentially what we're learning from these policies, right? I thought, well, look at society today. Look at how unbelievably entitled the whole planet is right now. I mean, of the modern Western world, the people that, we pat ourselves on the back for being so smart. Here I am, and I'm suffering from like this bizarre irony that I'm watching one of the funniest comedies ever made, if you understand the generational quality of the show itself. But why does that show exist? Because a bunch of bankers lured the United States of America into a police action, not a war, with the North Koreans, a.k.a. the Chinese resistance as well, right? So if that hadn't happened, someone wouldn't have written the book MASH, which turned into a movie, which turned into a series. And this 11-year series, I think the war only lasts like 4 or 5 years, but this 11-year series of all this comedy and funny stuff that most of it has nothing to do with war. War is the facilitator in some of the drama. But all these, quote unquote war heroes that come out of every war, it's interesting when you think about what a bummer that is. That we have to have wars to create heroes. Now, we don't, obviously. But there's something about that, something about the selflessness that is facilitated through an act of war. I watched Hacksaw Ridge, Mel Gibson's new movie, and although the first act is inconceivably corny when it comes to the way that basic training went down, it's sort of a classic, almost 50s script, if you will, in the first part of it. But considering the goddamn movie is a true story, it's unbelievable when you see it. You're like, God damn. And it's when it starts getting to the real nitty gritty of this guy saving people on top of this ridge, it's almost verbatim the testimonies of the people that were saved. It's incredible. So the thought process that we don't want to acknowledge is are that these policies are actually in place to put us through the full extent of being alive. Right? Wars are allowed because wars bring out something in us to make us hate war. You must have a war. To understand what injustice is, one has to suffer injustice, or at least observe it in great detail, such that one can notice that's happening to you. Could God come down and solve all of your problems? Yes, regardless if it is a neural net of spiritual energy or a central consciousness of energy, of course. And there's two ways that could go, just at a whim. God could give you the answers so you can intellectually go conquer them yourself, or God could simply just wave his spiritual hand and remove the circumstance of which is your challenge in the first place, right? But neither happens quite so literally, right? Now again, many of us have had experiences where we ask for mental strength, spiritual strength, and it seems to arrive and you seem to feel better. Whether or not it's a placebo effect that we enforce on ourselves, or whether or not it's actually coming from some celestial body, who cares? I think that the only people that I see that struggle are people that don't engage this reality or engage that spiritual reality at all, right? My atheist buddies that don't believe in anything, they don't reach out to the universe for anything. And so their only form of existence is a left brain existence, which is probably the hardest path one could take, right? But now let's close on a concept that I think is very important to remember. And it depends on your level of strife on this particular day that you hear this message as to whether or not you're going to subscribe to this. But give yourself a second to think this one through. There will come a time in your life where you will contemplate that nearly everything other than human is in a balanced ecosystem, as long as we don't fuck up everyone else's ecosystem, right? But think about it. The vegetation in the world, the animals in the world, the insects of the world, they seem to be in some beautiful ecosystem that existed long before man was capable of destroying it. And we just know that's the case. Regardless if you're in a dome shaped like a disc or you're in a heliocentric infinite universe, it doesn't matter. There's a program running regardless of where you think you are. There's mathematical rules that hold the universe together and perpetuate every moment from state to state, of which we record through memory in a concept known as time. There's only the now, quite frankly, right? Memorizing is merely your capability of memorizing the program and its policies on how things work. If you step off a building at 10 feet and fall and break your ankle, well, then now you have a lot more empirical information about stepping off a building that's 110 stories as to what's going to occur. A child that doesn't know a surface is hot is not capable of touching a hot surface and not having it be hot, simply because the child can't conceive of it, which means whatever is. Now, there could be some arguments that things hive mind between us and that we indoctrinate our children with just thinking and that it wouldn't be hot as long as we didn't think it was hot, as long as everyone the child's ever met didn't acknowledge it was hot. You could do that too. But this final closing point is that as much as we would like to push pause on life every once in a while, right? You might want to push pause or at least loop the tape for one of two reasons. You might want to loop the tape if life is good. You know, you're in one of those moments, man. You just know, God damn, this is good. Oh my God, he or she loves me. We just had the best dinner, the best sex, whatever. Oh my God, my kid's the coolest person in the world. I love watching them at a recital, watching them play a basketball, football game, do a dance, whatever. This is like the best, richest moment. I just want to live this a few more times because it was so wonderful. And then you get down in the dumps. Oh shit, I'm broke. Someone I love died. My car just broke down, I don't have any money. Those kind of situations. And then you want to push pause. Like, God, can I just push pause on life and then step to the left and just go to Hawaii for a week or two or a month or a year and just break free of all these weights that seem to be put on you, right? But the policies force us to keep going. We're not allowed to stop time. We have to keep marching forward. Now, back when I was young and I was looking at the elders of my life, you had elders that didn't think this deep in most cases. If they did, they didn't let on that they did. Let's put it that way. But what's very interesting about the elders in the Midwest, especially the old guys and gals that would raise you, your grandparents and their friends, is that they sort of went to the very edge of realizing this stuff, whether or not it be acutely aware of it or just simply feeling the overall gestalt of this wisdom. And they would help you deal with these realizations through little, catchphrases and stuff, right? And it helped. The old phrases like, sometimes you eat the bar and sometimes it eats you, the end of Big Lebowski. If you've ever put a lot of thought into the policies of the universe, you'll definitely kind of vacillate between the various stages of the Kubler-Ross thing. I mean, it's all the phases. You'll be angry at times that God won't present himself. Denial, well, I'm not sure where you apply that, but you might believe through denial that you simply haven't discovered the methodology that would make God convinced to come visit you, or a relative, or whatever policy you're thinking about. Negotiation, oh, that's an easy one. You pray to God to come visit you, or a relative or something, right? Acceptance, well, hopefully that's one that we can spend most of our lives in, is acceptance, right? But what is the job of sort of a philosopher, which is you? It's to never stop thinking, never stop parsing reality, right? Trying to get at something that will enlighten us. Here are my thoughts at the end here. I think that all the policies are in place for extremely good reasons. Whether or not I understand them or not, I have to force myself to completely endorse them. We have a life to live in this form. We do. Doesn't matter how many times you reincarnate. It doesn't matter how many transcended forms of reality might exist after this. Doesn't. Take your imagination. I promised I would talk about this. We're allowed to imagine things inside our mind's eye, right? We can close our eyes and think about things. When you put your head on your pillow at night, you might think about being someone you're not, or doing something that you have never done or may never be able to do. Maybe it's just you're Superman or Superwoman or whatever. Now, I think that that's healthy for your mind, as long as what you're thinking about is healthy for you, because it's a law of attraction in that direction. My episode on dreamscaping is all about the power of when you go to bed at night, thinking in the direction that you want to wake up in. Because when you're asleep, I think that just might be a time when the train leaves the tracks and it becomes this sort of, Back to the Future train that can fly. You can end up and land wherever you need to land. So definitely keep that going. But why does your imagination, almost as a policy, stay an apparition? It never really becomes photographic in your mind. It can get really, really close. Really, really close, especially if you're on some sort of LSD or something. And again, I haven't taken ayahuasca and that kind of stuff, so maybe it, quite frankly, does become real. David, I talked to somebody for 13 hours. But I think that what would happen is if we could just sit on a sofa, laying down in a bed, sit in a chair, whatever, and bring our fantasy realities to complete fruition within our mind, usurping all of our five senses, and we would be able to create our own virtual reality simply by imagining it. It would highly pollute our existence as whatever we are, Homo sapien sapien, in this reality. You might fall in love with an alternate reality that you imagine, and therefore when you wake up, you extra hate the reality that you're in, even if it's pretty good. You know, spending your life with another human being in the same house, day in and day out, with children that you're responsible until you die, responsible for until you die. That's a wonderful privilege if you can pull it off. And so if you were to say, well, gosh, if I just modified it like this and just like that, and just my kid was just more like this and more like that, my spouse is more like this and more like that, and you start living like, you know, Jean-Luc Picard in that Next Generation episodes where the probe came up to the ship and he was zapped and he lived a full life inside the memories of this probe, because the probe was there to teach people about the society that died due to an exploding sun. And he wakes back up and he has lived a full life in a split second. He's gone from his current age to 90-something and passed away and had a family and kids and, you know, lived this alternate life. And it was very hard for him to reabsorb back into his normal life for episodes. It's one of the most brilliant things they did in Next Generation. That would be us. And so I believe that there are policies in place to ensure that that doesn't happen, that we don't screw with things. Again, like I said in a previous episode, this program that we are running in right now is perfect. There are no lines of code that are broken. If any of you have ever written software, I want you to think about writing the software to hold this whole place together. And I don't give a shit what you think we're living in or living on. It is a computer, just like Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Earth was a computer. In this particular case, the whole universe is a computer. And it is perfect, right? Doesn't have any flaws. So when we ask that question, how do evil people seem to benefit while the just seem to suffer? It's a relative statement. You know, if you have everything that you need, but you are sold through magazines and Hollywood and television on things that you want that are transformed into needs, and then you feel like you don't have what you need, which is all an illusion, you're being duped. In the end, we might have everything that we need within reason. So this episode is really about the existential policies of the universe. I think we can accept them. So in the comments, throw out some more policies that I missed. Obviously, there are tons and there are infinite policies, but let's go after the big ones. Just talk about this a little bit. I know you feel me. DeepThoughtsRadio.com for all the feeds. It's a podcast if you are watching videos, and there are videos if you are listening to it on a podcast. That's all you need to know. Comments have been amazing. The subscriptions are going up. Again, we have an organic growth pattern in our channel because I don't use any technique whatsoever to gain subscriptions beyond just word of mouth. The subscribers that we have just been fantastic. I mean, there's nearly 200 videos in this channel already, even at 191, and everyone behaves really well. So we're very fortunate. We'll just let it grow organically and keep it that way. Take care of yourself and someone else, and I will see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over now.